This issue of Meadow Afternoon will find us picking summer strawberries from the garden, baking fruit tarts, working on a cross-stitch design, colouring digital stamps, and taking a trip back to the village of Little Thatchbridge for a short story. This video is kindly sponsored by Ohuhu. More about that later on. Small red jewels hide in the leaves, not too sweet and not too sour, best eaten with custard and cream or boiled to make sticky jam. Be sure to harvest them quickly. There are many others who also want those little red strawberries. Let's begin this issue with a colouring session, and I'll discuss how I use digital stamps in my journaling. Digital stamps are digital versions of traditional rubber or acrylic stamps. The files are usually formatted as a PDF or JPEG and can be printed out at home or at a print shop. Digital stamps come in all sorts of styles, designs and sizes. They're basically black and white line art that you can colour in and use in your projects. For supplies, I've printed out a set of digital stamps. These are ones from my own shop. And I have a set of 48 pastel Ohuhu alcohol-based markers. I thought I would share a few colouring tips today that I find helpful. This might be especially useful if you're new to alcohol-based markers. The first tip that I have would be to print your images onto cardstock. You want to use thicker paper than regular printer paper. Bristol board is great for colouring with markers generally, however, most home printers have a limit to how thick your card or paper can be to go through the printer smoothly. I'm using a 180 gram cardstock here, and that is the thickest card that works with my printer. 150 gram, 120 gram cardstock would also work well if your printer can't take 180. When colouring with alcohol-based markers, I would generally stay away from watercolour paper, as the paper will use up the ink in your markers much quicker. Once printed out, I would recommend leaving the ink to properly dry before colouring in, and try not to brush your markers directly over the printed outlines. This avoids any smearing. That said, I didn't have any issues with that today. In order to get a smooth laydown of colour, I recommend colouring in small circular motions, going backwards and forwards over your lines. Working in one small area at a time is much better than jumping all over the place. You want to try and blend all your brush strokes together before the marker ink dries, and overlapping your brush strokes really helps with this. You will naturally have some streaks in the colouring, especially in larger areas, and this is a process that's done by hand, so I wouldn't overly worry about getting everything perfect. It is hand-coloured after all. The circular motion is what I find to be the most effective in minimalising streaks. Now for a word from this segment's sponsor, Ohuhu. Ohuhu creates quality and affordable art supplies, from markers to paints and sketchbooks. The Ohuhu alcohol-based markers are some of my favourite supplies to use. They come in a huge range of colours, set sizes and nib types. There are now also refills available for the alcohol-based markers. These refills are easy to use and come in 51 of the most popular colours. The refills contain 16ml of ink, have a price tag of $4.99 each, they have a screw top lid and a needle tip, making refilling your markers super simple. There are 2 ways to refill a marker. The first is to carefully drop some ink onto the marker nib, 1 drop at a time. The second is to remove the marker nib completely and then place a few drops of the ink into the body of the marker. I like to use 4 to 5 drops of ink to fill up an empty marker. You can find more information at ohuhu.com or click the links in the video description. Thank you Ohuhu for supporting the channel. Now let's look at blending. When blending different colours together, I work in groups of 3 colours, so I have the base layer, a mid-tone and then a much darker colour which I only place where I want the darkest shadows to be. I start with a flat base layer, working in small circular motions and completely colour in my area. Then I add in some shadows with the mid-tone and then add in the darkest tone on top of that. After that, I blend the edges of the darkest tone into the mid-tone with the mid-tone colour, and then I use the base colour once more to blend the edges of the mid-tone sections into the base layer. I work base layer, mid-tone and then darkest shadow and then repeat those 3 backwards in order to blend everything together. My final tip here today would be to make sure you test out your markers and your blending groups before colouring. The caps on the markers, and this applies to pretty much every marker brand, are not that accurate to the colours of the markers. Make sure you test your colours first, and this set actually comes with a little swatch card that you can fill out and keep in the case with the markers. I find colouring really enjoyable, and I love printing out a page of line art and colouring everything in whilst watching a video or listening to a podcast. Once I'm finished colouring in, then I can just cut out the elements for use in later projects. I particularly like to use these sorts of elements in my journal pages and other paper crafting, such as greeting cards, bookmarks and scrapbooking. If you're interested in digital stamps, then I would recommend looking on websites like Etsy, where there are hundreds of different designs and styles to choose from. Do you remember the Shire, Mr. Frodo? It'll be spring soon, and the orchards will be in blossom, and the birds will be nesting in the hazel thicket, and they'll be sowing the summer barley in the lower fields, and eating the first of the strawberries with cream. Do you remember the taste of strawberries? From The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien. A large bowl of strawberries and cream, sticky red strawberry jam spread thickly on toast or eaten with fresh scones, deep red and scattered with tiny seeds. Let's explore the world of strawberries for a bit. A well-loved spring and summer fruit, strawberries have been enjoyed for thousands of years. Tracking strawberries through human history is interesting as they pop up all over the place. One early reference is from the Roman period. The poet Ovid in the 1st century AD mentions the fruit in his work Metamorphosis. Ovid describes his golden age, when mankind was new, innocent and untroubled. During this golden age, he describes people feasting on strawberries amongst other wild-growing food. The fruit, it seems, at least according to Ovid, was enjoyed by humans from the beginning. Travelling further on in history, strawberries find themselves featured in medieval illuminated manuscripts, hand-painted onto the pages, often alongside other natural elements. I've included a link in the description box to a couple of pages as examples, including one from the Master of Dresden's prayer book. In Christian art, the berries are usually interpreted as a symbol of humility or righteousness. A German painting from about 1420 depicts the Virgin Mary with a baby Christ and an array of strawberry plants in the background. On the culinary front, the combination of strawberries with cream, as was described by J.R. Tolkien in the beginning of this segment, is often credited to Tudor England and to the cooks at Hampton Court Palace under Cardinal Wolsey. That is before his falling out with and ultimate demise under Henry VIII. An interesting element to these depictions and stories throughout time is that the strawberries that the Romans and the Tudors would have enjoyed are not the same as the main one we eat today. They would have been consuming a much smaller, wild and woodland varieties. The modern strawberry that most of us eat today is a hybrid of two different wild varieties from the Americas, which were brought back to Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries. The Victorians continued to experiment, producing larger and juicier varieties, some of which are still cultivated today. When imagining food in the past, it's easy to forget the centuries of cultivation and the creation of hybrids, and simply imagine that the raw ingredients look similar to what we have today. A strawberry, one might imagine, is a strawberry throughout history. This is where doing a simple bit of research can uncover a whole world for me to explore. A trek through history following a small red berry, from Ovid to illuminated manuscripts to Hampton Court Palace, and then into the realm of plant hybrids and Victorian gardeners. I love these research rabbit holes and the journeys they take me on. Regardless of changes to the fruit, a shared enjoyment of food winds its way through history. The strawberries and cream enjoyed by the Tudors may be a little different to the strawberries we eat today, but the combination is still one that many people enjoy. I think the final question here is whether the hobbits at the Shire would have been eating the more modern, larger variety of strawberry, or whether they would have been eating the wild and woodland ones that was more familiar to the Romans and Tudors. given that the Lord of the Rings books were written during the 1930s and 1940s, perhaps we can assume that Tolkien was imagining the current, more modern variety of strawberry that would have been available to him and to us now. Although hobbits foraging for wild strawberries would also make sense. That is a question that I think, unfortunately, we will not get an answer to. The Vicarage Strawberries. A short story by Ida Williams. The Reverend Mortimer Cove observed his position with a great deal of satisfaction. He had, after all, worked hard for many years, and this reward that the Lord had seen fit to bestow was quite right and exceedingly well timed. While Mortimer's sense of pride and happiness tended to transmit itself in an outward display of smugness, as he walked quietly through his new church, a deep and rather humble sense of gratitude fell over him. In many ways, he had a right to be proud. He had served his previous flock well, surrounded by the poverty and grime of a northern industrial town. He had lived, preached, and visited his parishioners dutifully. He had listened to their woes, gave advice when asked for, and likewise a great deal when unasked for, presided over marriages, births, and ultimately said the last rites for many a family. Throughout those years living under the belching factory chimneys, a singular goal had propelled him forward. A hope, a dream, a wish, a prayer. Running his hand along the back of a pew, he had to remind himself, not for the first time that day, of his surroundings. It was a small church, not richly decorated, no stained glass, just a modest row of arched windows. The pews were simple hard wood, a couple of sweeping carved lines acting as decoration. A tiny parish in the middle of the countryside was not the most prestigious nor sought-after living, but it was the only one in England that Mortimer wanted. 4 weeks ago the letter had come, informing him of the previous vicar's death. The living was open if he wanted it. If he wanted it. The question brought one of his trademark smug smiles back onto his face, curling upwards ever so slightly at the sides of the mouth and arching his right eyebrow at the end. That whisper of a smile, an eyebrow tilted marginally upwards, had been known to annoy many. Some learned to ignore it, while others chose to reply in kind. Only the vicar's wife knew to look below the surface, past the pompous prose, and into the sometimes petty but ultimately loyal and strangely noble interior. He was back in the village where he had grown up, back in the church he had attended as a boy. Spurred by a sudden memory from long ago, he quickly found his way to a familiar pew by the wall. A stone plaque set into the wall recorded the resting place of a long-gone knight, a member of the local gentry. Some said he perished on a crusade. Others told that he returned with a king's ransom of gold and buried it in a cowshed. Around the man's name lay a set of curling leaves and strawberries carved in relief. Mortimer traced the little berries with one finger, just as he had done many a Sunday before. He had used to imagine the great knight and his many adventures in lands far away. Now he cared little for the man written in the stone, or of his travels. Faraway lands held no interest for the vicar. What mattered was that small church. It was where he belonged. "Felicity, where are you?" Roused by his wife's voice, he quickly glanced up through the long windows. The warm afternoon sun filtered through and sent down rays of light. As with many parents whose child had gone through long bouts of illness, the name of his daughter being called sent a sudden and familiar wave of panic through his system. He was outside in seconds and across the patch of grass that separated the church from the vicarage cottage. He needn't have worried. Little Felicity Cove sat in the middle of an overgrown garden, happily picking flowers. She grabbed one at a time, tearing off the leaves and laying their heads to float on the grass around her. At 6 years old, she was thin and sickly looking, her hair cut short, recent illness casting a long shadow. Breathing heavily from his dash, Mortimer leaned against the fence for a moment, watching her carefully take apart a daisy, one petal at a time. There lay the heart of his relentless need for that small church and country living. It was far away from the soot-filled air Felicity had been born in, away from the dirt and the germs that she seemed so susceptible to catching. Looking at her face, he wondered if there was almost a hint of blush coming. God willing, she would grow stronger here. "Oh, Felicity, there you are. Morty, I was so worried. I thought she was sitting on the sofa where I put her." Delia came rushing out of the front door, the books she had been unpacking tucked under one arm. "You must not go wandering where Mummy can't see you. What if you don't feel well?" Delia began to brush the discarded leaves off her daughter's dress and then gave a sharp squeak. "Mortimer, look, she's been eating something red. Are there poisonous berries in the garden? Do we need to take her to the doctor? Get the car, I'll get her coat." Rapidly observing his daughter's stained mouth and the half-eaten remnants lying beside her, Mortimer placed a hand on his wife's shoulder, halting her spiralling anxiety. "It's only the strawberries. I told you the garden was full of them." The vicarage at Little Thatchbridge was well known, amongst the villagers that is, for its large quantity of strawberries. Growing in abundance, the plants without fail appeared every spring and provided the very best and juiciest strawberries to be found anywhere in the village. Some would argue in the county, but few in Little Thatchbridge had travelled further than the next town over. No one could remember who had planted strawberries in the garden of the vicar's cottage, or when. There were just simply always strawberries. "She may get sick, Mortimer, eating so many." Now, Delia." The pompous tone, which had been thus kept at bay by overwhelming gratitude, now reared its head once more. "Fresh fruit will be good for her. We'll just have to teach her not to eat too much. Don't fuss so." Saying not to fuss was a losing battle. Mortimer Cove knew that only too well. The end. I have been wanting recently to expand my crochet skills. I am much more familiar with knitting overall, and it took me a while to get the hang of working with a single hook instead of 2 needles when I first started out learning to crochet. I've mainly crocheted granny squares and doilies so far, but nothing 3-dimensional. About a week ago, I saw a call for testers for a cute crochet pattern over on Instagram. I sent a DM and I was happy to be accepted as a tester for this pattern. So the pattern is by Accents by Claudia and is an adorable little 3-dimensional crocheted turnip. I am using cotton yarn in white, green and purple. I really enjoyed working on this pattern and I certainly improved my skill set as I went along. One of the issues that I had at the beginning was not quite getting my tension right. The tension on the first turnip was way too tight at the beginning, and it took me a few goes of crocheting and then frogging and then crocheting again before I got the hang of how tight to hold the yarn. There was also a very slight size difference between the white and the purple yarns, as they were from 2 different brands. On the first turnip, the difference in the yarn sizes is much more visible. The purple section bulges out a little bit above the white. This happened because I used a 3mm hook for the entire thing and didn't take into account the difference in the sizes of yarn. However, on the next 2 turnips, I swapped hooks. I went down a size to a 2.5mm hook for the purple sections, and then swapped back to the 3mm hook for the white and the green. That really helped to even out the look of the different yarns. I also fixed my tension, and I think that by the time I reached the 3rd turnip, it was pretty close to the pattern pictures. The only real change that I made to the pattern was to add in black plastic safety eyes, as I didn't have any black felt, which is what the pattern called for. In the end, I'm really happy with how the little turnips turned out. Each one is unique. The first is certainly less perfect, but I did learn something new with each one of them, and I improved my skills a bit. I think next I would like to work on a granny square blanket, although I am tempted to make some more little crocheted objects and animals, so we'll see. To end this issue, I'd like to recommend a movie which some of you might enjoy, The Baroness and the Butler, made in 1938 and starring William Powell and Annabella. It's a romantic comedy about a butler turned politician and, well, as the title suggests, the Baroness. William Powell is his elegant self, as always, and the story is charming, if not a little unusual. The past few weeks have been filled with strawberries here in my studio, from writing and research to baking and sewing. I've added a couple of new PDF products to my shop. The Strawberries digital stamp set and the Strawberry Patch cross-stitch design are both available. As always, you can find all the links in the description box below or head over to the website at meadowafternoon.com. I was happy to write another story set in Little Thatchbridge for this issue. If you don't know, I have a second writing YouTube channel where I post the short stories as standalone videos. That way, if you ever want to just listen to the stories on their own, you can find them all over there individually. I am currently working on uploading previous stories, and I will put together a playlist of all the Little Thatchbridge ones soon. It's certainly one of my favourite locations to write about. The story today was fun, as it's set a good 15 years or so before the others that I've already written. And it introduces a couple of characters that I have not written about before, at least not directly, and there are some hints in there at their backstory. The vicar's wife Delia has been in, I think, at least one of the other stories, but her husband and her daughter have not. I have lots of plans for the characters living in Little Thatchbridge, so keep an eye out for further developments if you enjoy these stories. Thank you for watching today's very strawberry themed episode. If you're new, welcome, my name is Ida. These are inspiration style videos with seasonal slow living, short stories, creative projects, history, cooking and updates for my novels. Think of the videos as a visual magazine coming into your subscription feed once a month. Feel free to say hello in the comments below and please consider subscribing so you don't miss the next issue of Meadow Afternoon. Until next time.